Hey, it's Matthew Cudmore, and welcome to Story Behind the Stone. Today, we're walking the battlefields of Europe with the UK Director for Liberation Route Europe, Ben Mayne. The Liberation Route Europe is building a first-of-its-kind cultural route and network that connects people, places, and events to mark Europe's liberation from occupation during World War II. With hundreds of sites and stories in 9 European countries, the route links the main regions along the advance of the Allied forces from 43 to 45. It's all connected by themed hiking and cycling trails that let you literally follow in the footsteps of history. From Normandy to the Netherlands, Dieppe to the Scheldt, and now 1,000-kilometer-plus Canadian trail, they're weaving together military and civilian stories into a continent-spanning remembrance map. Their work connects youth to history, and with new digital storytelling in the pipeline and major anniversaries ahead, Ben and his team are working hard every day to keep the past alive in ways that are both powerful and urgently relevant. Ben, a million thanks for joining the show, and to our listeners, thanks for tuning in.
Welcome to Story Behind the Stone, where we talk service, sacrifice, and stories, connecting you with the most interesting people in the field of veteran causes and commemoration. My name is Ryan Mullins, along with co-host Matthew Cudmore, and we are with Memory Anchor, a company committed to using technology for good as we change the way the world remembers. And today we are talking with Ben, who is the managing director of the Liberation Route Europe. Ben, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Good evening, gents. Thank you for inviting me along.
Ben, it's great to see you. Thanks for spending your evening with us. We sincerely appreciate you staying up so late. We have lots to talk about. We know that you're wearing kind of three hats at the moment. You're a historian, battlefield tour guide. You're actively working in the advisory council with the taxi charity for military veterans in the UK, and also with Liberation Route Europe. I don't know how you keep your head on straight with wearing so many hats, but would love to just hear a little bit about how you got involved in this area and what keeps you going in those kind of three main buckets of work that you're tackling these days.
So you're right. It is pretty much three hats that I wear, and they're constantly changing, or sometimes you've got two on at the same time, depending on where you are and what you are doing. But I always say I'm very lucky to be in this position. I'm grateful. And due to kind of unforeseen circumstances in 2019, a change in my previous career, it opened the door for me to go more towards my passion of history. And that started off with battlefield touring. I also, the previous year, 2018, made connections with the taxi charity in the UK. And been to the Netherlands Liberation in May with them. So that's where kind of I got involved with them and started to form relationships with the committee members, the chairman, and so on. And then at the back end of COVID, the Liberation Route Europe, I'm obviously the director of the UK branch. I went to a conference in 2018. I met Remy Proud, our director. It was a new introduction to the Liberation Route Europe, eyes wide open, really liked what I was seeing, what they did, what they were doing, what they wanted to do with the future. And I was introduced to Remy by Joel Stopples. I'm not sure whether you know Joel or not. Remy walked up to me, shook my hand, and he said to me, "So you're going to be the director of the Liberation Route Europe UK then?" And I paused and was like, okay, we might need to have a chat about that. And yeah, just over time, the relationship that I formed with Remy, the European team, I'm very grateful for the opportunities that he's given me to then branch out into the UK to build the Liberation Route Europe UK up. And we're striving going forward, lots and lots of projects, lots of work. I always say there's probably not enough of us for the amount of work we've got as well. With what we're trying to do with all our projects. But it's brilliant to be involved. I'm very lucky. And I think the important side of it, similar to yourselves, is that we're carrying that torch of remembrance, that baton that we're passing over for future generations. And we're ensuring there's a legacy there to commemorate and remember those from the Second World War that we research, we talk to, we learn about, and want to pass that on.
If you could zoom out just at the 30,000 foot level, what is Liberation Route Europe doing? Just so our listeners can understand it just a little bit better.
It really is a large network throughout Europe that we're trying to bring together, whether it's museums, educational centres, academic institutions, through to history lovers, people who are interested in the Second World War history, to make it a place where you can come to. You can be signposted towards museums if you wanted to go do that, or signpost you towards the battlefields, towards the cemeteries where you can then go visit, pay respects, remember. That is all mapped. And what we're trying to then do to incorporate, to join the dots with all of this, is to create a more sustainable tourism product with new hiking trails or cycling trails to try and encourage people to go and explore the battlefield in a different way. But I always say the best way to do it is to walk it anyway, because if you're in a car, you just drive past things, really. You don't appreciate or see certain things. But being out on foot, walking through those hedgerows, through the fields, along the beaches, through the countryside and the cities as well, it just adds so much more to be on the ground. And that's what we're trying to do with creating these themed routes, to piece the stories together.
I think someone who's been fortunate enough to go to these places and see some of these historic areas, you get such a deeper sense of gratitude for the scope. You know, when you walk along the beaches of Normandy and then you head to one of the cemeteries, and it's a kind of an ineffable experience. You can't really describe it, but it really starts putting things into perspective for you. Is there any place in particular that you've covered that really sticks out for you, that you're drawn to or is meaningful to you?
One of my favourite places to go and visit is Caen in Normandy. And the main reason for that is probably because some of the veterans that I was very lucky enough to spend time with, their particular story and battles were around the northern area of Caen. It links in nicely with the Canadian stories as well. Operation Charmwood, the large battle there. And to go and walk the ground around there, knowing that these men that I'd met took part in the fighting, to hear their stories firsthand. They obviously survived, but to then be able to go visit the cemeteries where some of their friends are buried, it kind of adds that context into the story, that it's not just something in a book. This was real. This happened. We're talking about real lives, real impact on families, and also the impact on the veterans as well, seeing their friends die in front of them, in their arms in some cases. And to walk that area, all the fields to the north of Caen, then into Caen city centre, for me, I find is a very special place to go and do that. And I could spend hours and hours, as I have done over many years now, just walking the fields on my own, in my own thoughts, piecing things together. And with the Liberation Route Europe, it's kind of that we can then start to piece together, to give others the opportunity to go and walk the battlefields, visit the cemeteries, learn the stories of those, the British, the Canadians that were fighting in that area.
When you open up your website, there's one image of a lady crouching down by a tree, and then it transitions to a soldier that has been sitting there. And I think that's really capturing a lot of what these trails are doing, as you're walking in the footsteps of these individuals and you're being reflective and trying to put yourself in the shoes of someone else. And as I hear you talking about that, Ben, like you lead tours, you take people out there, you hear already the knowledge you have of this stuff. What keeps, like, what is that spark? What keeps you doing this, or inspired you to do this with people?
The reason why I think I get satisfaction from helping families or helping the veterans to piece their stories together, to carry out that remembrance side, probably goes back to my own personal story with my great-grandfather, who served in the First World War in the Royal Artillery. He survived, he came back. The stories are that he was shell-shocked, he was not well from his experiences, understandable. And just before the outbreak of the Second World War, he took his own life, sadly. And when I've tried to research my great-grandfather, the records have been destroyed. So I can't go back to either France or Belgium where he was and walk in his footsteps, stand where he possibly was. And I can't do that. But if I can help other families to be able to do that, to remember loved ones, whether they survived or whether they're in a cemetery, it kind of helps me that I'm giving something back, and we're doing collectively that important thing of remembering and keeping their memories alive. And I think that's where the drive and motivation comes from. And I don't think that will ever go away either, because there's just so much still to learn. It doesn't matter how much you visit the archives, how much you read, you will still always be learning. For as long as I think I'm doing this, I will be.
I love asking that question to see how people get into what they're doing. And it's a beautiful and sad kind of answer, not being able to know that history yourself, but that high level of compassion for that experience and being able to give that to others. For you, what is the importance of passing that torch?
It probably comes down to respect and the appreciation of what these men and women did for us during that period. We always say that they were ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances, and they went way beyond. They stood, they fought for what was right, and many did lose their lives, that ultimate sacrifice. And the least we can do is remember and be grateful for what they did for us, and the freedom that we afford today because of that. And it should never be forgotten.
As you stand in any one of those cemeteries and you look at the almost countless headstones in there, it really hits you when you start thinking that each one of these people had a story or a family that loved them. And I think, with Matthew and I, one of the big things we're constantly trying to do is share that story, or share it in a way that creates empathy. Can I see myself in the story of someone else? Right. And then it really, I think that's where it sinks in. And our hopes is that we can do that for that younger generation, start, helping use technology in a way that can get them to see themselves in some of these individuals.
The technology side as well, going forward, is crucial and key to what both of us are trying to do with how we want to present those stories, the information. And the younger generation are looking to use that with the technology on a screen, what can be delivered in front of them. And it does have a place on the battlefields in the history to be used to make sure we're doing the right thing and giving as much as we can.
It's funny as you're saying that. And then, Matthew, you and I, we've been having this conversation a lot about QR codes recently. There's been this big drive, and in Germany, there's a bunch of QR codes that ended up showing up on gravestones that actually caught kind of international news. And it kind of brings the question up is like, there's a time and a place for QR codes. There's great places that can be appropriately used for it and not, but it enters the conversation as like, how do we use our technology for good? How do we make sure it's adding to the experience and not taking away from those experiences? Is that kind of a conversation that you have or is in your mind at Liberation Route?
We're always discussing the technological side of what is the right thing to do. QR codes is a common thing that we talk about. Where can we put them? Where's the right place to put them? And you just alluded to cemeteries. How would a QR code work in a cemetery? And I guess if there was a QR at the foot of a grave, it may draw some questions around it, but it's kind of signposting the people to the correct location to then access the applications or to get to the data and stories. It's definitely changing. The younger generation will walk around the cemetery with their phone in their hand, looking at their phone. That doesn't mean that they're watching YouTube videos or anything. No doubt they will be looking at the Commonwealth War Graves Commission website. If it was a British Commonwealth cemetery, they'll be looking through the database. And then yourselves, the information that you bring along and can provide. One thing I always say when we visit the cemeteries is when you're stood at a headstone, you can stand in front of it, nice, peaceful. You can reflect. You'll no doubt read each line of engravement on the headstone. But for me personally, if you have a photograph of that person, it just takes it to the next level. It just becomes more personal, seeing that face of a young man or woman that was serving. And that's where, for me, the technology can rightfully be used to bring those stories to the forefront. And the younger generation definitely do want to see that.
It's something that's in our mind quite often too. And actually part of our technology will drop an augmented reality picture beside a headstone. And so if you take a picture of the headstone, what happens is, what I mean by augmented reality, there'll be a floating picture of that soldier, if we have one, that actually shows up to the grave. And again, as that attempt to humanize. And what's been beautiful about that is we've had a lot of families actually getting behind the graves themselves and taking a picture, and there's their family member, the individual who lost their life, and then the family around. And it's been a really neat application. You've gone through a lot of these cemeteries. You've worked with a lot of people. Is there any stories that really resonate with you that you hold close to your heart?
Just to go back to one point you made earlier about taking families back and walking in the footsteps of their loved ones, I was very fortunate 2 years ago to take a lady with her husband on a tour. Her father was killed in action close to Hill 112 to the western side of Caen, an officer. And she said to me that she thought this was the last time she was probably ever going to come back to visit her dad. So straight away, you understand it's a really poignant time for her to come to see her dad's grave for the last time. She had visited before, but doing the research that we do, quick time on the ground, I was able to locate the location of his field grave where he was for, I think it was roughly around a year before he was moved from his field grave into Bayeux War Cemetery. And I took her to the location of her dad's field grave, and we spoke about that. And one thing she didn't know, that when we went to the his grave at Bayeux Cemetery, is the Royal Artilleryman that is buried next to him was also in the field grave with him, or at the side of him. And she wasn't aware of this, and she found real comfort, obviously very upset, saying that, I'm glad he wasn't alone. And then she tapped the grave of the man next to him and said, thank you for being his friend, thank you for being with him. And it's moments like that that you get that satisfaction that you've done the right thing for the families, you've helped them to get closure, comfort in the loss of her father. And she knew that her dad wasn't alone when he was out in his field grave, and it helped her. And then sadly, a year after she had visited, I got a message off her husband saying she'd passed away, which was a great shock to me. But I'm glad that I was able to take her and her husband back for that final time that she could see her dad. Another story that is very close to my heart, you may have heard about it before. I spent a lot of time with veteran Alan King from the East Riding Yeomanry, landed on Sword Beach D-Day, went all the way through to the end of the war. Operation Charnwood that we just briefly mentioned, his tank commander was shot in the head on the 8th of July at Galmonch, just to the north of Caen, and he died in Alan's arms. They took him back to an aid post where he was taken out of the tank. Alan said that the medics were shaking their head and just said he was gone. There was nothing that they could do. And Corporal Wilkes was buried in a field grave next to where Cams on Plain War Cemetery is now. And over the years, taking Alan back many a time, we'd always go into Cams Cemetery. Alan had his own kind of routine that when we'd arrive, we'd take that step back. We'd just let Alan go in to do what Alan needed to do. And he'd go in, he'd walk down to Louis's grave. He'd stand in front of Louis's grave. He'd come to attention. He'd salute Corporal Wilkes. He'd then go round to the back of the grave. Alan would take off his beret and then place it on top of Corporal Wilkes's grave and then stand with his hands on the grave. And at that point, we knew that was kind of the signal that Alan was happy for us to go down to him then. We just wanted to give him that space. And one question that Alan always had was, he knew Corporal Wilkes's wife had emigrated to Canada. and they got 2 children. And he said, I wonder whether any family ever come back to visit Louis. Do they ever remember him? And we asked that for a good several years, until one year we'd made a visit, we'd placed a wreath on the grave, and I'd put my email address on the back of the card on the wreath. And I'd also written an article that was published about the visit with Alan. And one day, out of the blue, I got a email from the Wilkes family saying, we've read your article. We've seen that Alan is going back to visit what was their granddad. We'd love to meet Alan. We desperately want to meet Alan. And again, using the technology, website, so on, we brought together the Wilkes family with Alan King. The Wilkes family had got this gap in their family history. They knew the granddad had gone to Normandy. He had been killed during the Battle of Normandy, but that was it. They never knew anything more because he was never spoken about. Louis's wife wanted to kind of forget about everything that had gone on. And Alan was able to tell the grandchildren exactly what Louis was like, all the funny stories about how Louis was, kicking them into the swimming pool during training, that older brother fatherly figure in the tank that looked out for the younger ones. And then I'll never forget sitting in the chapel that we were using for the meet. Alan was going through the story in the build-up to Operation Charmwood and Louis being killed. And as he got to that particular point, he was crying. The Wilkes grandchild was crying as well, understandably. And they just hugged and embraced. And he said to Alan, I'm so glad that you were there with him when he died. You were a good friend, and I know that you did all you could for him. And I like to think that brought some closure to Alan, what would be probably 74 years on since that day. But then also for the Wilkes family, knowing that Alan over the years had always thought about his friend Louis, Corporal Wilkes, and went back to visit him. It just always feels the right thing to do, that you've helped people to connect, and that important act of remembrance, that we're not forgetting these stories.
You're getting both Matt and I. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. That's that connection, and that's your hands-on connection you made. But I can't imagine the numerous amount of other connections you've made just because of the work you've done.
Yeah, there's lots. It's always a privilege to take families back to the battlefields, to visit graves, the cemeteries, or just to walk in their footsteps on a particular area of the battlefield and add more context to the families. And then spending the time with the veterans is a complete other side to the story as well. And I always say I probably came in at the back end of this, really, meeting the veterans in their late 80s. That's purely down to our age group. I know some of my colleagues that knew them when they were in their 50s, 60s, so they've had a lot of time spent with them. But whenever you're with the veterans, it's cherished time for sure. And sadly, we all know that we're coming to the end of that.
Your work with the taxi charity, I'm curious, you're talking a lot about closure decades and decades later. You're an ambassador and an advisory council member. What is the taxi charity doing now, and how is the role and kind of the mission evolving, with these changes as time passes on?
So the taxi charity preliminary really has been helping the Second World War veterans to visit the battlefields of Europe, but also locations in the UK. And it's not just the males. There's a fair amount of ladies that served as well that come on our trips, also played a crucial role. It's around at this time supporting them, giving that opportunity to go back to visit their friends that didn't make it home. And another part to it is it's quite a big social side for them as well. You've got elderly people who sometimes may be estranged from their families or don't get to see or go out an awful lot. Maybe the cost of a trip, possibly too much, depending on their financial circumstances. And the charity does absolutely brilliant work in helping them to be able to make those trips to go back. And as we just said, the focus at the minute has been around the Second World War veterans, but now we're trying to move across how do we support the next generation of veterans. And you have the Korea War veterans, and they're close to 90, if not well in the 90s now. We've then got more recent conflicts where you can't really return to the battlefields for them. Afghanistan, Iraq, for example. Falklands, yes, but it is a long way to go, quite challenging to get there. So how are we going to help the next set of veterans along? What can we do to help them to go back? And it's not always as well about going to the battlefields. It's that social thing. What can we do? Day trips out? Is there somewhere they'd like to go? So there is that side to it as well. And some of the more day-to-day things, if they've got hospital appointments, can the taxi charity support them to get to and from appointments if needed? There's that kind of support that can be offered as well. But the focus at the minute still is supporting those Second World War veterans. There's lots on the go and lots of work to be done with the taxi charity, but it's a privilege and honour to have been asked to work alongside them and support them. And now engaging with the younger veterans to see what we can do to keep that going, similar to the history that we've already spoken about as well.
Really inspired by hearing some of your work there and with the charity. If somebody wanted to support that, where would they go? Because I imagine donations are really important to keep this going and support these veterans.
So the Taxi Charity Military Veterans website in the UK, there is a link on there to donate if people wish to do that. There's usually several fundraisers going on as well, whether it's committee members doing their own little challenges to support or a bigger event such as the London Marathon. We've got a blind veteran who is going to be running the London Marathon and supporting raising money for the taxi charity. So we've got that coming up. Yeah, if you visit the website, you'll find the links and there are options to donate there if people did want to support with that.
Liberation Route is funded by the European Union, is it? Or who is it funded by?
The Liberation Route Europe is funded by our members. So, for example, I always use the Netherlands as a great example because the network there is phenomenal, especially the museums, the regions that all collectively come together to support and promote the history. So they do pay towards the Liberation Route Europe with memberships. We do have all different income streams through grants, European funded projects. In the UK, we're looking for the National Lottery Heritage funding that will help support us. It is a non-profit organisation, so everything that comes in is used to go towards the remembrance and the history, promoting it, to signpost people towards the museums that are supporting with memberships and so on.
Before we were talking a little bit about some interesting work you're doing with Canada. Did you have something you'd like to share around that?
One of our major projects that we're currently working on with the Liberation Route Europe is the Canadian Trail, mapping from Normandy all the way through to Germany, the route of the Canadians. And I always say to people, just because we are called Liberation Route Europe doesn't mean it is 1944 to 45 in Northwest Europe or 43 onwards in Italy. One thing that is very relevant along a Canadian trail in northern France is Dieppe. So we're covering 1942 as well. That story cannot be forgotten for sure, because it shapes and moulds what then goes on afterwards, not just for the Canadian story, but also the Allies with landings. The Canadian Trail, I want to say it's going to be well over 1,000 kilometres worth of route. Historical points of interest. The whole network is running at probably around 2,500 historical points of interest at the minute. We're going to be adding upwards of another 200 at least for the Canadian Trail. And that is tracking through Normandy, down to Falaise, up to Rouen. It covers the 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion across the northern area of Caen, up towards Cabourg. From Rouen up to Dieppe, then tracking that long left flank through the coastal ports, Boulogne, up to Calais, Dunkirk, crossing the border, Battle of the Scheldt, and onwards. You know the Canadian history very well, so I'll stop there. But it's given us the opportunity to focus directly towards that Canadian participation. And one of the meetings I had recently, we were talking about one of the goals with this. And from a British historian perspective, when you speak to the Canadians, some people feel that the Canadian story is overlooked. It's always that the Americans won the war and, oh yeah, the Brits were there helping them along, and the Canadians aren't really spoken about. But I always say, from my perspective, on the tours that I do, I spend a lot of time speaking about the Canadians, especially around that Falaise area, Caen, whenever we're on the road. And this project's allowed us to cement that, to make sure that the true Canadian story is on the map, that people can look at what they did across Northwest Europe. And also the interesting part in it, we don't always focus on the military aspect of it. We want to see the civilian perspective of the war as well. And we briefly mentioned it earlier, but what was the impact the Canadians left on the French civilians, for example? And that remembrance side, the gratitude of being liberated by the Canadians. And one of the great things that we've managed to be able to find is a photograph taken in a very obscure, tiny village in Normandy of 2 field graves of Canadian soldiers. That the local villagers, the school children, had come out, they'd placed flowers all on the graves. And I guess it's potentially a teacher, or it's one of the elderly residents of the village, had taken a photograph of those field graves with the children and the flowers all on. And the photograph was given to the Canadians, and the letter with the photograph was asking, could this be sent back to the family of those 2 men to allow them to show that we have cared for them, we're looking after them, and that respect towards them, both being killed in action but remembered, and the civilians grateful for the liberation that was afforded to them. When you read through the report in the archives, it looks as though that photograph never made it back to the family members because they couldn't track who the field graves were for at the time. But obviously now they've been aligned, and just one of many stories from the Liberation Route Europe that we were able to uncover and allow people to see is that photograph of the field grave of those 2 Canadian men and the story that accompanies it. And who knows, I don't know whether the Canadian families had ever seen it before, whether they're even aware to this day that that photograph existed. But from the archive, getting it onto other platforms, hopefully the family have seen it, or they will see it in the future, and it helps them.
There's such a rich history, like you're saying, from the closing of the Falaise Gap and then into the Scheldt and all those areas. And especially, I love the focus on French civilians, because it would have been a unique experience to have a bunch of French-speaking Canadians coming aboard to liberate and have that experience. I'm curious on, what's next for you. You obviously have some big anniversaries coming. Is there anything you'd like to highlight? Any projects, other projects you'd like to highlight before we wrap up?
So there's lots of youth projects with the Liberation Route Europe that we're working towards. In the UK, we've got a Duke of Edinburgh Award expedition. I think it's July, where we'll have young adults exploring the New Forest area in Hampshire, again in the footsteps of Canadians down there. I'll be back out on the ground or on the battlefields touring, as well as doing Liberation Route Europe work throughout the year as well. So yet again, I always said the 80th anniversary year was going to be manic. This year is the same, but I'm not complaining. I'm very, very lucky, privileged to be able to do this. And it's an honor to be able to do it and keep those memories alive.
Ben, that's amazing. And the work you're doing is amazing. If Matthew and I are ever able to catch you in the area, we're going to definitely try to hop on one of your tours and just pick your brain. Your wealth of knowledge and the stories you have are just phenomenal. So I want to thank you for joining us today.
No, thank you. Thank you for the invite.
And to your listeners, if you've enjoyed the stories and the talk that we've had with Ben today, please make sure to like and share and tune in again with us another time.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Story Behind the Stone is available on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and on the Reach Across America radio network, on iHeartRadio, Audacity, and TuneIn. Just search for Wreath. We air every Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern on the Reach Across Radio Network. Thank you for tuning in.